Dr. Gandy was willing to come up from New York today to talk with us and represent himself and Mount Sinai. And I thought we'd kick it off since he's devoted his life to neurology, and just share with us what is neurology.
So, neurology is a study of the nervous system and diseases of the nervous system that involves the brain, the spinal cord, the peripheral nerves, muscles, the excitable tissue of the body.
Right. Why did you pursue your passion of neurology as a career path?
The challenge of trying to understand the brain is really trying to understand who we are, and that was sort of too challenging to resist.
Right. Good for you. And one of the things that, just reading on this with the history of lifespans, we past 100 years or so, 100 years plus, lifespans have doubled, and that obviously has some challenges that come along with it. And with relating to the increase in lifespans and the challenges, I just thought relative, and we don't have to get into the Alzheimer's and dementia portion, which is part of today, but what are some of the biggest challenges that have come from just the doubling lifespans just the last 100 years?
Well, I think the obvious dissociation between lifespan and health span is you can stay alive and not necessarily be healthy, and between body health and brain health. It's been much easier to keep the body alive longer, to extend the life of the heart, the cardiac system, the kidneys, the lungs, than it has been the brain. I mean, the brain still there are still some major diseases that are especially affect the older populations that we haven't yet gotten under control.
And I keep in my homework and just reading a lot about the subject matter. I keep hearing that the next 10 years is really critical for biotech and the whole concept of extending lifespans. What makes the next 10 years, assuming you even agree with that, what makes the next 10 years so critical, as a time frame where this stuff is moving so fast?
Part of it has to do with the explosion of the aging population and the challenge of dealing with that group, because they're not necessarily the folks who are the sort of early adopters with technology. So both keeping them healthy and bringing them to technology and technology to them are some of the major challenges for the next, with this sort of, it's called the silver tsunami, the post World War II baby boom that's now turning 80 and above. That's the largest, but that's the most rapidly expanding population group.
And along those lines, with biotechnology, like what it seems the word I'm getting is that it's accelerating the progress that we're making towards extending lifespans. And why is it happening like quicker in the next 10 years than it has in the past 40, let's say? Like is it accelerating? If so, why?
So I think what's happened to enable that are a couple of fronts. The first is using machine learning and artificial intelligence to try and really accelerate our ability or the ability to process enormous bodies of information, so that robots and computers can crunch through things much faster and 24 hours a day, whereas humans are more limited. And that's certainly one area. The other is just this concept of big data. We used to look at processes and sort of networks and one or two pathways to try to understand biology. Now, whenever we look at say Alzheimer's disease, we require thousands of subjects and immediately look at networks of hundreds of molecules to try and get, because our appreciation of the complexity has grown, and our ability to handle the data that underpin that has really exploded.
Right, and then so that trend line, if you will, is just going to accelerate. We'll be able to crunch more data and process more variables, if you will.
Yeah, and then there's no slowing down. If anything, there's acceleration in that area.
And just can you try to draw a line between that happening and why that's good?
Well, it's good because the things. I mean, basically, life, the body, the brain, the cells are way more. We're sort of finally reckoning that things are way more complex than we had appreciated before, and now we're both appreciating that and being able to design our computing systems and data management systems are sufficiently sort of expandable and pliable that we can begin to take all that into account.
Just a curiosity in your field, in the field that you research as a professor, do other hospital systems share their data with you, or is it Mount Sinai's got its own database, and you share with other people so you can make faster progress on solutions?
So I would say if left to their own devices, there might be siloing, but there are groups who are always sort of encouraging the silos to break down. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, there's a program called the Accelerating Medicines Partnership, which is a sort of public-private partnership aimed at using big data approaches to Alzheimer's disease. And so the first thing they did was to bring together sort of the top 5 big data groups who are working in Alzheimer's, bring them together with a group that was charged with harmonizing how all the data had been sort of individually accumulated so that it could be put together into one large database that everyone could probe. And the attractiveness of going, sort of basically jumping an order of magnitude in the size of the database, and the ability to sort of interact with others who are sort of both competitors but also colleagues in the same area, was very was really irresistible, and has really made that area jump in progress.
So that association that was successful had better outcomes.
Yeah. It's clear that we're. I mean, if anything, the issue now is we're getting so much information. How do we stratify it and prioritize it? Because we can't possibly deal with 100 different hits. Looking for drugs for 100 different hits at a time. So we have to stratify them and decide what sequence to prioritize them. So it's given us a different problem, but I mean, it implicates molecules that we would never have thought of before, pathways that we would never have thought of before. So it's really Alzheimer's disease. When 30 years ago, when the first disease gene was discovered, looked like it was going to be a fairly simple single sort of pathway. Now there are 30 genes and several hundred pathways that seem to be involved.
Right. Let's transition to the stem cell research and just their role in extending not just life but the quality of life. And is it happening now? I know things have to get passed through the FDA and all different type of organizations, but just explain the stem cell research. Is it happening now, and how does it work as far as extending life and quality of life?
So I would say that the examples where stem cells are today extending life and extending quality of life are in the senses in vision and research, and vision and hearing. I mean, it's possible now to restore sight in certain conditions and restore hearing in conditions. This was not possible before. These are people who were deaf and blind, doomed to being deaf and blind lifelong. So where things are, sort of the big picture. So stem cells are they're sort of the primordial type of cell that can ultimately be differentiated or specialized to form any type of cell in the body. So if you have a stem cell from someone, or if you can make a stem cell from someone, you can then recreate their brain in a dish by directing those stem cells into making all the cell types that form a brain. You can then grow that together in a dish and have a model of how that person's brain would operate both in health and in illness. So we can really develop, talk about personalized medicine. We can take a skin biopsy from someone and basically turn that into a dish full of their brain cells, and specialize and screen medications and optimize medications specifically for that particular person.
Okay, and then that was a little over my head. But
So let me go back. So the beauty of stem cells is that you can turn them into any cell of the body.
right.
And so a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues in medicine and science are the inter-individual differences, the heterogeneity. I mean, why you're different from me, or we're different from everyone else. And so that's limited screening drugs, because drugs tend to be screened in sort of against large numbers, and rather than against individuals. So with stem cells, you can create in a dish or in any sort of a cell culture situation the exact same heart cells or lung cells or brain cells that a particular person has. It can really be person-based medicine.
And is that when I read about rejuvenation of your organs kind of thing?
Yeah.
Meaning, you're walking around, 100 is a new 60, and you're 80 years old, and through stem cells rejuvenation, you have a 40-year-old kidney or something like that.
Right. So because of stem cell technology, we could take, say, what's typically been done now is that skin cells are used as sort of for biopsy material. They're then sort of de-differentiated backward into stem cells, and those stem cells can be turned into anything. So one of the problems with transplantation is rejection. If you can take someone's stem cells and create a new liver or a new kidney from their cells, that would not be rejected. That would be self, and you can implant that and restore organ function. That's certainly true for is already possible for liver and for skin. And skin's a big problem in say burn units where skin has been lost. It's possible to regrow skin and to reattach that to burn patients and have it help them recover from severe burns.
And what are the limitations now relative to the stem cell and rejuvenation? Because you said the area is optical, and what was the other area that it's working on?
Eyes and hearing. Because I wanted to sort of come to a place where to start with where we've finally succeeded with using stem cells to do something good, and it works. I mean, there's been it's been promising for decades, but now it's actually making people better. For something like Alzheimer's disease, the challenge is we can't sort of rebuild a person's entire brain. That's we don't understand the brain well enough to do that. But we might be able to use stem cells to implant simply in areas that are the most damaged and help them recover. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, the region of the brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, is one of the early areas that's damaged. It's possible that we might be able to take a particular individual's stem cells, and we already now have a recipe for making them into the exact type of nerve cells that die first. And we can implant them into the hippocampus and potentially extend people's memory spans, so they would be independent longer and be able to to function at their maximal level longer.
And I just had a couple of things on positives and negatives of this whole stem cell. Like any more, I mean, you said some positive things there. Anything else that you want to close on that was really positive about the future of stem cell research and the use of them?
To reveal, to model disease and to make new breakthroughs, and to repair organs and tissues that previously had been couldn't be repaired. So I think that sort of covers the scope of where things are. I think the main frustration has been the working in this area for years without having, especially in the brain, having some sort of major success you could point to. There's been some success in Parkinson's, but I think the most dramatic is in blindness and deafness, where the people who are blind and deaf can be their sight and hearing can be restored.
And are there going to have to be laws passed relative to using the stem cell rejuvenation in other parts of the body, or you can do it right now?
It's being done right now using the person's own cells.
Right.
Basically, we can take your skin and turn it into retinal cells, and now put healthy retinal cells into your eye, and they'll clean up whatever debris is there and reestablish vision.
And then I saw in some of the notes that you had sent me in one of our conversations was, and I didn't know what it was. I thought it'd be worthwhile to just chat about it, because it might be simpler than I think it is. But the difference between like lifespan extension and brain span extension.
Yeah, well, so the idea, it's very simple. We can keep the body alive longer than we can keep the brain alive longer. Well, in terms of health span. We're able to extend the life of the cardiac system, the hearts and lungs, but we still have the problem of late life brain degeneration. Alzheimer's affects half of the over 85 population, and if you go to 100, maybe even a larger percentage. So that becomes limiting if you're really trying to extend the lifespan of large populations. If half are dementing at age 85, that's going to be extending their lives will raise some ethical issues. If they're severely demented, is it really the right thing to extend their lives? Would they want to have their lives extended?
Why bother?
Sorry?
Why bother?
Well, it brings up the issue of advance directives. What sort of state would you like to be? If your life were to change dramatically, how would you instruct your family in terms of what things you would want done and what things you wouldn't want done?
Just a quick, I'm the king of useless information, and I looked up a couple of things just in preparing for today, and with basically the same species, I guess, but a steamer clam, which many of us have eaten in the past, on vacation or at home or whatever. Steamer clam maximum lifespan is about 28 years, and an ocean quahog, same family, maximum lifespan about 220 years. Moving forward, the painted turtle maximum, which I've never seen one of those, I don't think. Painted turtle maximum life 11 years, and the Galapagos land turtle 193 years. So big data. You touched on that. It's supposed to be the game changer when you're pursuing a longer lifespan, and you commented on that. Anything else you want to say on why that's so? Besides the processing, gazillion things versus what computers could process, just trying to draw the line between that, the big data, and the ability to process all this data and get more and more knowledge. why that would be a big component for people, potentially living 100, 125 years. I mean, can you just comment on that?
Well, by expanding the scale, things have sort of declared themselves as being important pathways that we wouldn't necessarily have thought were that important before. In terms of optimizing people's lives, it's important that we know that the things that are most important in every, say every decade, and that's now much more obvious that we're studying groups of thousands and tens of thousands rather than groups of tens and hundreds. It's just that the diversity of the species is such that of humans is such that you need to be studying thousands and tens of thousands in order to see these events that are occurring at sort of rare but important levels. And
you and I had spoken, offline about touching on a technology called CRISPR genome editing, and if you could spend a few moments for us and just explain what that is and why it's good or not good.
So CRISPR is an anagram for basically a process that is best described as gene editing, which means that you can go into the DNA and make changes, make edits. And in adults, that's sort of less, if you change the DNA in say a few cells, that's may or may not have a great impact. But if you want to eradicate, say, genetic diseases, it's possible to use this technology. If you have, say, Huntington's disease in the family, you could potentially go into an egg or a sperm from one of the parents or whoever carries the disease and correct the mutation. So you can edit out the mistake. So that's the gene editing piece. It's not a destructive editing; it's a correction of these genetic diseases. And
you do that. You do that like once it's discovered, or in anticipation of it, because you.
Well, so once you know what the mutation is in the family, and then the family wants to have more children, you can go into the egg or sperm of the couple and correct the mutation. You can go and find the person who's carrying the mutation, go in there and correct it so that the child would not be affected. Otherwise, half the children would have the disease.
Right.
But it's possible to go in and avoids all the issues of abortion and that sort of way of managing the problem. But you can go in and actually correct the mutation.
And is that happening right now?
Yeah. So it is. There are a few reports in China where it's been done in humans. There's the issue that's come up is that this tool that's when you focus it at this mistake to correct it may fix that, may make that correction that you're interested in, but may induce some mistakes elsewhere just because it's hard to control and focus it. So it's important that once you use the tool, that you then go back and sequence the entire genome of the cell that you've edited to be sure you haven't made any other mistakes. And we were only now appreciating that, and it's not clear whether these experiments in humans that were done in China were adequately managed or sort of sequenced to see what sort of mistakes they had introduced.
Or maybe caused other mistakes.
Sorry?
Or maybe caused other mistakes.
Exactly, yes, right.
And along the same genome concept, how does the CRISPR part fit into that?
So that's the tool. That's the actual sort of enzyme and DNA sort of specificity that allows you to do the editing. CRISPR is really just it's the type of enzyme that you use to do the editing. It's an anagram for some sort of palindrome sequence that's especially useful for editing.
And when someone says, "Hey, I had my genome mapped, mapping genomes, the services, the companies that do that
Right.
now, right? Why would you want that done? And actually, have you had that done?
I haven't done it well, actually, I guess I have. I've had the 23andMe thing. I've used that for patients where I've been trying to find a cause of their illness. And it's now possible, again, because of the big data, to have a database that contains every DNA mistake that's ever been associated with cognitive impairment in any disease ever since DNA sequencing was available. So if you have someone with cognitive impairment and you can't figure out what it is, you can take that person's genome, sequence it completely, and compare it against this database and see if there's anything there that gives you any clues as to where what genes might be defective and how, and that might then give you point you towards the cause.
Interesting. And as these developments continue to take form and accelerate, I would, and that's part of what I want to communicate. I would assume, and you would already know this, that people with more financial resources might have quicker access to these technologies than folks that don't. Is that like the case right now? And you kind of see that being versus some of these cool things being like mainstream?
I mean, certainly in terms of both access to care and to the best care, yes, that's certainly, there's a socioeconomic stratification for that. In terms of being potentially targets for CRISPR correction, maybe not necessarily. I mean, for example, sickle cell is one disease that's being thought of as a disease that could be cured by CRISPR.
And I know your knowledge is expansive on this stuff, but dementia and Alzheimer's is something you spent a lot of your career, if not most of your career, studying. Can you, in transitioning to dementia and Alzheimer's, can you define and distinguish between the two?
So dementia is a general term that literally this means loss of the ability to think. Mentation is thinking, so dementia is loss of the ability to think. Alzheimer's is the most common specific disease that causes dementia, but there are at least a handful of others that are also important. Multiple strokes can do the same thing. Parkinson's can cause some dementia. There's a few other Lewy body dementia you may have heard of, and frontotemporal dementia. About 2/3 of all dementia involves Alzheimer's disease, and the other third is made up of various fractions of these other rarer forms, but not that rare.
Yeah, so those other types, those are all other causes of dementia.
Yeah.
Those other diseases, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's being two more popular ones where
They're the most prevalent. Yeah.
Yep. And the concept of this, and maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong, so I apologize. The amyloid.
Right.
Why is that? First, just explain what it is, but why is it controversial within the space of dementia?
So amyloid is a protein that's normally made all throughout the body, all throughout life. In people with Alzheimer's disease, its breakdown is impaired. So normally it's sort of made and destroyed every 45 minutes. In the brain of people with Alzheimer's disease, it begins to build up. And it's sticky, it forms these clumps called plaques. And they seem to be involved, they're one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. A lot of the initial genes that caused genetic forms of Alzheimer's seemed clearly to be operating through the accumulation of amyloid. So these genes acted to cause amyloid buildup, and it appeared that the amyloid buildup was injuring the brain and causing the Alzheimer's disease. So that was for the first 4 or 5 genes we discovered. That's when we thought, sort of, okay, so everything starts with amyloid, and that's the best target. And so let's wipe out the amyloid, and then everybody will be fine. And we actually developed a way to wipe out the amyloid. And unfortunately, though the amyloid is gone, the people have continued to decline. So now we know that there are 30 genes, not just these initial handful, and that not everyone who has clinical Alzheimer's disease actually has amyloid. So it's not essential to cause dementia, and it's not and purging the brain of amyloid doesn't cure the disease. Now that's sort of the examples that keep one trying to work out where amyloid fits in. There's a family in Iceland who have a mutation in their amyloid gene, and they have, from the moment of conception on, they have half as much amyloid in all the tissues of their body, and they never ever get Alzheimer's disease, even if they have other genes that would normally cause Alzheimer's. They're resistant. They can fight it off. So it's clear that you can go through amyloid to cause Alzheimer's, but the question is, how does it usually happen? And what are the things that are most important in most people who have Alzheimer's disease?
So what's the controversial part about, it seemed pretty factual what you said,
Well,
meaning you discovered these things. What's controversial?
Well, so for the past 30 years, almost everyone in pharma and a lot of people in academia have focused on amyloid-reducing therapies, and they've all failed.
Yeah, okay.
And so that we're in a stage now of sort of retooling, focusing on new targets. But it's clear, from this Icelandic mutation, that sometimes amyloid can be the cause and must play a role in some forms of Alzheimer's disease. So we clearly need to move on to other targets, but there's still reason that we still don't understand the whole amyloid story.
Right, got it. And what would be the most promising research that's coming down the path or right upon us relative to dementia and Alzheimer's?
So the stem cell stories are getting more interesting, and not so much with the we often think about stem cell therapies as being implanting surgically, but we've now found some medications or some drugs that activate the stem cells in the adult brain, so that the brain can potentially begin to sort of heal itself. And some of the drugs that we're working with that I'm the most excited about right now are those that stimulate the birth of new nerve cells in the hippocampus by activating quiescent stem cells that were there just sort of hanging out until we found these medications that would activate them.
Okay, so that's happening right. That's
happening right now.
Got it.
I would say the other strategy in terms of Alzheimer's disease, so that there are two structural features of Alzheimer's disease: the buildup of the plaque, and a second structure called the tangle that occurs inside the nerve cell. So after 30 years of focusing on the plaque, now everyone's focusing on the tangle, and we're developing medications and antibodies to clear those away. And that will be the next wave. What's also an important part of the next wave is coming out of the big data story, though, is the role of inflammation in the brain. And we clearly don't understand well enough what stages of Alzheimer's involve what sort of inflammation, when inflammation is good and when it's bad. We don't understand how to tweak that at all. And that's clearly playing a key role. That's still eluding us.
And along those lines, well, let me just finish on this one point on the Alzheimer's. Do you see like a time where Alzheimer's is defeated?
So I think, well, certainly with some of the genetic forms, they could potentially be cured with CRISPR now. In a way, those folks who seem to have the worst forms of disease, for all this time that we've been studying it, now may be the ones that are most tractable to gene editing. For most people with Alzheimer's disease, it's not that simple. Their Alzheimer's isn't as simple as a single gene to go in and cure. So, but I think we are finding more ways to intervene early, and the challenge is to find an intervention that we can use, say, beginning in midlife, that is safe and will prevent Alzheimer's. Some of the ways that we have of intervening now are not perfectly safe and would not be things that you'd want to give people for 50 years.
And can you I just know this from doing my homework on, your the work that you do. Can you comment on your work relative to NFL and brain trauma for soldiers, and what your involvement is in that?
Yeah. So we've been working with some brain imaging techniques to try and enable the diagnosis of this disease called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that affects athletes in collision sports, football, hockey, rugby, and vets or former battlefield exposure, people who've been war fighters exposed to IEDs. The repetitive exposure to IEDs causes rattling of the brain in the skull, sort of in the same sort of way as repetitive hits of the head in sports does. So this is turning out to be a complication of involving a substantial number of folks in both of those professions. It's now not possible to diagnose the disease during life, and that makes it impossible to really even estimate what the prevalence is, because we're biased by autopsy studies. So we're using some of the new brain imaging techniques that will specifically see the pathology of CTE, and we've begun to be able to see that during life. So we do have. I think we will soon be able to identify folks who already have fairly advanced CTE and be able, if they're still having exposure, be able to advise them to limit. They might want to limit ongoing exposure in terms of sports or being on the battlefield. What we don't have yet is something that's going to be useful very early. These techniques, this imaging technique, looks like it sees people once the disease has already begun, and so we can at least perhaps advise people to refrain from things that are causing head trauma, so that they can cease the progression. But we would like to be able to prevent it from ever happening at all.
What's the organization, Sam, up in the Boston area that is the one that does it sounds like it does the autopsy work on NFL players anyway?
Yeah, so that's at BU. That's at the CTE Center.
Okay.
Because
I know I know reading this over the summer, it might have been the Wall Street Journal or something, but Nick Bonacani, if you remember him, as a Miami Dolphin, great player, and he was the 111th brain that was donated to Boston University. Now I didn't know that was them. And of 111 NFL players that they did an autopsy on, 110 had this CTE. Did I get that right?
Out of 110 symptomatic players.
Okay.
So this is not random players.
Okay, got it.
These are people who were referred there because they had the clinical symptoms of CTE when they died.
When they were alive.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of those numbers are the scary numbers. And they're biased because those people, we knew that they had the symptoms. So yes, the pathology matched the symptoms.
So they're almost confirming it.
Exactly. It's like if you went to a nursing home full of demented people and they all had Alzheimer's disease, you wouldn't be surprised. So those are the numbers we're trying to not combat, but to try and get more relevant to living people, because that's the autopsy bias that's caused some fright that everyone in the NFL is going to get CTE.
Yeah.
That's by no means the case. Boxers get concussed even more, and it's clear that not all boxers dement. I'm sure there are genetic factors that play a role, as well as other things. But I think we'll understand a lot more about it as we start to be able to diagnose it early on.
Any closing comments on just the whole subject matter that we spoke about today that you want to share with the group?
No, I mean, I think the extending lifespan is a reality that's going on now. What we want is that for people who are living longer to be cognitively intact during those later years, so that they can enjoy them.
Understood. And well, now it's time for questions, and I know Sandy. Thanks for waiting patiently, Sandy.
The question, doctor, would be this. Have there been any studies made why certain families living the same type of lifestyle, husband and wife, boy meets girl, have kids, have an exceptionally long mortality rate, with very few exceptions? Other families, same type of lifestyle, have maybe the exception would be somebody who has a long mortality rate. Are there any studies in those lines as to what causes it or why?
Yeah, so this is now the phenomenon that's called resilience. And we spent lots of centuries focusing on sick people and why they get sick. But we haven't focused on the well people and why did they stay well. And we're trying to understand now the genetics of resilience, why it is people who can remain, what do they have in their genomes that keep them so healthy for so long. In fact, there are people who can have the full pathology of Alzheimer's disease and not be demented, at least when they die. I mean, not even be impaired, even though they have the entire, they meet autopsy criteria for Alzheimer's disease, yet they are fine when they die. So clearly, they have the resilience genes that enable their brains and their synapses to continue to function despite the fact that this junk's building up. So, it's a very important part of where things are headed.
Well, I guess that's what I'm driving at. Are there any specific, does Mount Sinai have any specific studies in that direction, or are there any other institutions that are working on it?
Yeah, and the Mount Sinai has a particular interest in the area and has been working on it for a while, both in psychiatric disease. I know more about the brain areas for obvious reasons, but a lot of what has been going on in terms of depression and schizophrenia for a while, and now more in the Alzheimer's area as well. I don't know. I'm sure there are places, and I just don't know the heart.
I'm sort of distinguishing between Alzheimer's and mortality.
Right. Well, but it's the same concept. I mean, the things that are keeping your body alive and healthy, and that's also resilience. And so you're able to either fight off illness, or you have genes that prevent you from ever getting them.
Chip,
Thank you. You've been very helpful tonight.
Chip, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I first of all, I want to thank you, Bob, for bringing this gentleman here. I find it fascinating tonight, and I think it's really nice you're doing something for your clients. It's not about finance and wealth, but something of added value, and I appreciate that. I'm sure others do here as
Thank
well.
you.
So I'm looking at this and saying, well, are we going to have stem cell doctors at some point where we have an a la carte menu, and we could sit there and say, well, we want this, and we need a heart situation, this. Do you see this as a big business someday, in 5 years, 10 years, or where's this all going for the average people? And I assume money pays for things. I'm curious where you see this going in so many years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the combination of stem cell, the advances in stem cell technology, and this ability to regrow tissue and to print it, to form it into say you use a 3D printer to create a new ear for someone. I mean, it all sorts of does give you the sense that you can potentially have a menu of things that you want to replace. So I mean, you could I could see that as a way of looking at things. I mean, I don't usually think about it in that perspective, but yeah, I mean, certainly in the way of the way sort of spare organs, spare tissues, et cetera, are being, are becoming available. Yeah, then people who need them replaced will obviously queue up to get new ones.
So my follow-up, I guess, is on eyes and hearing, I guess, is what you were talking about before. Is that something that's relatively out there, that most people that have those diseases or those problems, they know they can get it right now, or get their sight back potentially? Is this something that's marketed out to the doctors that take care of these people, where they can go in now and do this, and does insurance cover that, or is this something people pay for? Is this a big, I think it's amazing that you told me that.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I mean, some of the insurance companies are dealing with these super high cost medicine, even small molecules that are curing, like the cure for cystic fibrosis and the cure for spinal muscular atrophy. There are tens of thousands or millions of dollars for a dose, but you only need a single dose. Certainly there are active discussions about how to deal with the expense and how to sort of redistribute, or how to get distributed the technologies to the people who need them. I wouldn't necessarily say that it has gotten to the point of being advertised, direct to marketing advertisement, but it is happening. I mean, the breakthroughs are happening. Most of these are within the past year, though. I mean, the sight, the vision, the hearing, the SMA drug, the cystic fibrosis drug. I mean, those are all in the past year. So,
part of this Singularity, university thing is, I just read a report today that had to be like 52-page report, just trying to get acclimated to some of this stuff. But in the report, they tell you, Chip, like, this is the name of the business. I had actually ordered a book today because they said this book will describe the company and what this gentleman's doing with his company. So you get the book on Kindle if you want it. But the point is, they talk about the businesses that are specialized in each area. Now, a lot of them are going to fail, run out of money. Some are going to be successful. But what's neat about it is you can actually read about the businesses and go to their website and see what they're attempting to do if they're not doing it with some success right now. And but how it's marketed, no idea, except for if you're solving an important problem, a lot of times, you don't need brutal marketing campaigns if you're solving a big important problem, because the word will get out, through referrals and obviously the people that want to help other people. John.
Yeah, I have a question about information sharing. We know that AI, machine learning, has an insatiable appetite for data. Are there any impediments to that data actually being shared? Is there not data that's siloed, the term you used earlier, because the institution is dependent upon it to get grants, or researchers that are focused on the top priority of being published in their articles more so than sharing the data with others?
So there's the privacy issue, and that sort of helps. That involves, that's relevant to all of these things. So that a certain amount of personal identifying information, health-related information, has to be stripped off. And certainly, as I was saying before, talk about these big data groups who we're sharing now. 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we're all competing with each other. And now, basically, so the way the marriage is forced is that the NIH brings together or identifies the sort of the platform design group that would be able to tackle harmonization of all of the different sort of idiosyncrasies of how the different groups are managing it, and says, okay, we have all this money. If you all want to continue to be funded to work in this area, then you have to work together, and you have to put your data in this common bank where it's available to anyone qualified, scientists who register, even before it's published in manuscript form. So part of this whole AMP8, and this is an example, but it gets to the heart of the issue, is that certainly the NIH recognizes that this is a problem, and that the only motivation is money, and so if they throw grant money at the big data groups and say, if you want this next piece of $10 million or whatever, then you play nice. You come to the meetings and you share your data, and you deposit it in this shared sort of harmonized database before it's published. As soon as you're sure it's right, you deposit it.
You have a question?
Stem cells aren't FDA approved whatsoever.
Right. I don't think so, because the
It's
companies,
outside the United States.
the companies that I read about that are really, people that are going 3 times a year for stem cell injections or whatever, what they'll do is, I know there's a company in San Diego, they do the whole thing where they take whatever, 1,000 data points on your body, and I made that up, and then you drive to Cabo over the border, and you get your treatment, and you come back to San Diego. They're doing that right now with Florida and Bahamas. That was their next office. Get all your tests done in Florida, go to Bahamas, come back. And so, but I think that's just a question of time, though. Meaning, it's just a question of where we are.
Some of that's quackery. I mean, that's not all good stuff.
It's funny because I'm not like promoting it or not. I'm just saying that relative to
I
this,
think it's a great thing.
they call it stem cell therapy, I think. And I'm not,
You're right that there are some.
But the insurance companies don't pay for it, they say it's experimental.
It's not proven to work.
Part of that is proof of efficacy, and part of it is separating. Most of it is actually proof of efficacy. The other is separating claims from what can actually be proven.
yeah.
So people are spending money and it's not working.
There's certainly a lot of that going on, but there's a lot going on as well that's promising. I mean, the problem is that the con people, con men, are sort of riding on the coattails of the people who are doing good stuff.
The non-con man, the stories I read, where they have real life stories of people that I know, where they needed a hip and a knee replacement, and then did this, and now they don't.
There's a documentary on HBO.
Excuse me?
Documentary on HBO. Watch the guy. He's unreal. He was a bicyclist, daredevil.
Right.
He broke his back. It did help.
Right.
He had
So
he had to go elsewhere to get it.
And I'm sure in every business, whether it's my business,
He's
there's
back.
quackery. I
He's
get it.
not walking, but he's back.
But right now,
So
it's
the-
anecdotal, it's not FDA approved, it's anecdotal.
A lot of it's anecdotal. But some of the work that's being done, for example, in vision and hearing, is real and is being done in multiple centers. Probably the thing that's the closest to being FDA approved in terms of stem cells, other than the eye thing, are for orthopedic indications, and it is used orthopedically for veterinary purposes already. I mean, it is used for arthritis in giant dogs, for example, as someone who loves giant dogs.
Yes, Mike.
So I'm not quite 60 yet, so I'm kind of looking forward to another 40 years or so. But one thing we didn't talk about was cancer. And Dr. Ellison just won the Nobel Prize for his work in determining why the body doesn't respond and attack cancer.
Right.
How is this the big breakthrough we've been waiting for cancer? I mean, everybody here knows someone that has cancer or isn't it?
Well, it goes a long way to explaining how cancer can elude the immune response. So certainly that will be, whether it's the breakthrough, I can't be sure, but it is a breakthrough. I mean, it is revealing something we didn't know before, how tumor cells escape the immune response, how these obviously foreign cells grow and make masses that the body just ignores. When you can get a virus with from the flu or pneumonia, and the body will mount an intense response to it. And how does this, how do these big things get by, and these little things, you know, are all detected? And so it all has to do with masking and the sort of thing that Ellison has been working on.
Yeah, supposedly 100,000 people have been cured so far using the technique. I mean, it seems like nobody seems to know about this treatment, you know, and they're using it for leukemia, I understand right now, to start with, and they're trying to expand it to other treatments. I mean, this is, you know, we have a cancer center up here called the Ann's Place, and when I got a tour of it a while ago, they said something that really kind of shook me a little bit. They're actually planning for what to do with the center when they cure cancer. And they're seeing it happening that fast. I mean, is this really, are we living in a time where we don't realize how fast this is happening? I'm not putting you on the spot for it.
No, I mean, I'm not quite sure that I can see cancer being eradicated. I mean, that's what you're asking me. Do I perceive? I mean, sure, eventually it will be, but I don't see how we get that far, that fast.
Folks, we're gonna wrap it up. Are you gonna be hanging for a few moments? If has anyone had any other questions for Dr. Sam? And thanks for once again making an effort to come up and see us.